is Chang Liu. I'm a research scientist at Princeton Plasma Physics Lab. The title of my talk today is Restructuring of Finite Element Magnetohydrodynamics MPI code for GPU using OpenACC. So if you're interested in my work about the code, and you can go to the URL below. Okay, first a brief introduction about what we are doing at the Princeton or PPPL. So we are trying to explore new concept experiments to confine the plasmas using strong magnetic fields. Plasma can also be referred to as a fourth state of matter. It has a temperature in the hundreds of millions of degrees. And in that high temperature state, you can expect a nuclear fusion reaction to happen because the atoms and nuclei can overcome the potential barrier. And this can actually release energy, so it can become a potential new energy resources. So I think most people are more familiar with nuclear fission, which has been used in all the nuclear power plants today. Compared to fission, we think fusion has more potential because it can have more fuels and give less waste. And most importantly, it is a fully controlled reaction, so it is less dangerous. However, it has also more challenging as we need to confine such a high temperature and high energy matter. So in the right figure, I showed you some of the experimental devices we have. The top one is what's called NSTX. It's built at Princeton. So in the bottom figure shows another one built in France called ITER. So you can see that the ITER one actually is much larger. You can see that how the dimension of it compared to the dimension of a human body, but the basic structure of the devices are quite close. And so to have such a big device, we really want to make sure that it's working. We don't want it to explode after the millions of dollars into it. So that is why we should have a numerical simulation tools ready. However, the simulation can also be very challenging as it involves very complicated physics and involves a large time scale separation ranging from micro or nanoseconds to seconds or even hours. So that's why we need to have a good speed up the simulation code. Okay, so the code I'm going to talk about is called M3DC1. M3DC1 is a finite element code trying to solve the extended magnetohydrodynamics equations in tokamak and stellarator devices. And it's using high order finite element equations. So the C1 in its name is referred to as the C1 continuity regarding the boundary of the elements. The code is mainly written in Fortran 90 and it is utilizing MPI and OpenMP for CPU parallelization. So it's mostly like a classical or traditional parallel code. And so M3DC1 is widely used in fusion studies, including macroscopic instabilities and simulation events of confinement loss, also called disruptions, or impurity injections. So in the right figure, I showed you an example of our simulation showing that when the confinement is getting lost, so the black lines here showing the magnetic field forming surfaces are trying to confine the plasma. But when the field surface is broken and it's becoming stochastic, and you can see the loss of the runaway electrons, which is showing in the green color here. This whole thing can happen within 0.1 milliseconds. Recently, we have also developed a particle inset function in this code. So the code has now been evolved into a hybrid code in combination of a continuum, FEM, and particle in cell approaches. Okay, we have done two GPU optimization for the M3C1 code up to now. So one part is the calculation of the finite element matrix. And to do that, we need to do a restructuring of that code in order to separate the physics part and the numerical integration part. The numerical integration part now involves 4-layer nested loop and can be run very efficiently on GPUs with the help of OpenACC. We're also utilizing the multi-process service MPS developed by NVIDIA so that we can have multiple MPI processes to share GPUs and improve the efficiency. For the particle in cell simulation, we are using GPU to run the particle pushing in parallel with the help of OpenACC, and we obtain 30 times speedup. So we have attended 2 GPU hackathons, both at Princeton University, one in 2019, one in 2021. And we really want to use this chance to thank all the mentors who help us in the hackathons. Okay, so here we showed you basic workflow of this code. I think it's very similar to the other initial value code that people have discussed in this meeting. So in one time step, we need to do three things. The slightly difference with previous code is that this code is an implicit code. The first thing we need to do is to try to calculate the time advanced matrix. And then we need to solve this matrix. So to do that, we actually call the PAST library and calling some matrix solvers like SuperLU, MOPS, and CU sparse. And this matrix have, you can see that has the Sn and Dn. Sn is like an implicit matrix, and Dn is the explicit one. And X here is the field that we need to advance in time. And the third step is optional, that we can push particles using this new field. And then we'll repeat this time step calculation. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on the calculation of the finite element matrix, which is marked as red here. Okay, so if you are familiar with the finite element method, then you know that in order to calculate this matrix using Galerkin method, we really need to do a numerical a calculation of the inner product or a numerical integration for our operator acting on a basis function, then do inner product with the test function. So this integral can be calculated by sum over the contribution of different quadrature points. But we need to calculate for all the functions, which means that for all the bases and all the test functions. So now we have four nested loops here. One is for different terms in our equations. Here we only show the A term, but in principle we can have hundreds of terms in one equation. And then we had loop over test function, basis function, and quadrature points. And many of these calculations are independent, so therefore they can run parallelly on GPUs. However, in our previous version of the code running on CPUs, we're actually calculating the numerical integration inside the calculation of each terms, which means that this the physics calculation for each term and the numerical integration are done at the same time. So this actually runs well on CPU, but we find that it's very difficult to optimize this version of the code on GPUs. So in order to do the GPU optimization, we need to do a separation or the restructuring of the code. We find that after we do this separation, these two parts, the physics part, which is a calculation of the A operator on different quadrature points, and the numerical integration part have very different characteristics. The physics part is very complicated. It involves thousands of Fortran codes, but it has very little parallelism. So it may not run efficiently on GPU. So we still run that part of the code on CPU. But the numerical part actually takes most of the computation time. But it only takes a few lines of code. I'm going to show you in the next slide. And that part is time consuming. So here I'm showing the key point of this optimization, which is a numerical integration part. So here, so in the loop, so here we can see that we have a nested loop here. The first layer is the loop over different terms. And the second one is the J loop is a loop over all the test functions. And third loop I is loop over all the basis functions. We have another layer of loop, which is implicit one in here actually is because we use the intrinsic function, the sum of the provided by Fortran. So here I am, after we construct this, then we can put the OpenACC derivative as shown in red here to do the parallelization on GPU of all these four loops. However, we find that this part is actually not enough because after we calculate the summation of different terms, we still need to sum the different terms together to one single numbers and put it in our matrix. And for that part, we find that we still need to construct another kernel for the GPU, and that's what we call the step 2, which is a sum reduction of multiple terms. And you can look at the code, you find that there's really no real floating point calculation here. All we are doing here is just a reduction or a summation. But this is still necessary. I mean, in principle, we can do that using the OpenACC reduction. But unfortunately, we find that at the time we develop this code, this reduction function is still cannot really do a vector reduction. So it can only do a single or scalar reduction. But in principle, we find that this has already been provided in the new OpenACC specification, but unfortunately not being supported by the NVIDIA compiler yet. We hope it can be supported in the future. Another thing that we found is not being supported that in our code, we have two different modes. One is the spectral mode, the other is the real number. It's a nonlinear version of the code. In the spectrum code, we're actually doing computation for the complex numbers. So we are using double precision complex number, which is 128. However, we'll find that when we do that in the code, the compiler just tells us that the reduction operator does not support double precision complex number, which is supported for fortune, but not supported by the reduction. So that's another thing that stops us using the reduction. Okay, but you may notice that there's potentially another layer of parallelism in our code because in a finite element calculation, we have many different elements. And for each element, we need to do the calculation of this different terms and the different testing basis function. But we can also do the calculation of the different elements in parallel. But that part is already been done on CPU using MPI. So if we really want to do that in parallel on GPU, we need to restructure that part of the code. But in our implementation, we choose another approach. We actually use the so-called multi-process service so that we can actually ask many MPI processes to share GPUs. So here I put one of the plots that is in the MPI's menu from NVIDIA. So we can see that with this process, you can actually split your GPU into different parts so that each MPI process can just utilize part of it. So we're trying to do that implement that using our code, and we find that if we use 64 MPI processes per node, which has 4 GPUs, then the GPU utilization rate is about 50%. If we further increase that MPI ranks, we increase the GPU utilization. However, in the later test, we found that even without MPIs, the code can still run. I mean, I think this may be due to the recent upgrade of the CUDA library. And we find that actually without MPIs, you actually get, so this is a result that we obtained using the Nsight system. We find that without MPIs, the kernel runtime is actually shorter, and it's actually more stable because you can see that the variation is much smaller than run with MPIs. So we really don't know what MPIs is doing good optimization or not here. But basically, we have code that can run with and without MPIs, and overall performance are very close. Okay, so now I'm showing you the speed up of our code for the matrix calculation using GPUs. We're tested on the Traverse class at Princeton University. And this one has a very similar structure as Summit. So let's plan that using OpenACC on GPUs compared to running on IBM CPU, we get about 9 times speed up. But this is because we have this part running on both CPU and the GPU. For CPU part, we do the physics calculation. For GPU, we do the numerical integration. If we only count the numerical integration, speed up is about 30 times. So this is basically what we expect. And we also done a regression test to make sure the result is equal between the CPU and the GPU version. Okay, so in addition to the matrix element calculation, we also do the optimization of the particle pushing. This is actually done in 2019 with the help of another hackathon. For this part, we actually reach about 30 times speed up for the particle pushing on the using the NVIDIA V100 GPUs. So basically, in this implementation, there are several lessons that we learned. For example, we should use a particle-based parallelism to avoid a communication between different GPU threads. And also, we should not bind particles with threads. Instead, we should try to split a big task into smaller ones and do a dynamic allocation, so the utilization will be better. And also, we should try to use async features to asynchronize data transfer, and also make us able to use multiple GPUs. Okay, so if you remember that we actually have 3 different parts in the code: the matrix sampling, the part pushing, and also the matrix solver. So after we optimize the other 2, the matrix solver now becomes the bottleneck of the code. For that part, this is actually much more challenging as we need to investigate a new algorithm for the matrix solving, which can work better on GPU. We are collaborating with computational scientists at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and trying to explore different matrix solvers. So here I showed you one of the figures that they have in their papers. You can see that they are comparing their new super LU matrix solver with the performance with the CU sparse one. You can see that their performance is actually better than CU sparse, but it's still not as good as the CPU version. So basically, this means that if you run it on GPU, you just get the same performance or even worse. And more importantly, this is only obtained using one single GPU. If you run in multiple GPUs, this performance is even worse, but they are still trying to solve this problem. We think that this is the most challenging part for our code as we are implicit code and we really need to have a matrix solver. And Jin Chen, who is our collaborator, has submitted a proposal to the ASCR, the US Department of Energy for on the need of efficient and scalable solver for ill-conditioned sparse matrix equations. Okay, so this is my last slide. In summary, we found that to do the GPU optimization, we really need to restructure the finite element matrix calculation to separate the physics part and the numerical integration part. Then after the separation, the later part can run efficiently on GPUs. And so there's another potential restructuring that we can do is to trying to change from MPI to like GPU parallelization for the different finite element. But we didn't really do that. Instead, we use multiple MPI processes to share GPU with the help of MPIs. So we reach actually acceptable performance. But we know that there are other teams like the Nimrod code developing team. They are actually trying to do the other way. They are trying to do everything on the GPU in parallel. So we are really interested to see whether they can get a better performance than ours. Okay, some last words. We really love OpenACC. So they actually enable us to enjoy the benefits of GPU computing without switching to C and C++ or rewrite all the codes. So actually make our codes more portable. We hope that in the future, we can continue to use OpenACC with GPUs from other vendors. And other wishes, like we hope that the OpenACC can give better performance for Fortran in future and better support for modern Fortran features and the new OpenACC specifications. Okay, thank you.